Good morning, hey 094. This is my video response to you. Alright, now, I read your little thing. Toxic chemicals on trains? This is not Die Hard. Global disaster because airplanes that crashes? Oh, please. And trains would not crash. They would just slow down and stop. Huh. Here's your answer. Alright. Let's just suppose, now keep in mind, that in our atmosphere we have thunderstorms. Okay? They're all over the place. Just because you're not having a thunderstorm doesn't mean that somebody else isn't. Ask Australia. They'll tell you about all the flooding rains they've had. So, you got a jet stream that can change at any moment. You've got thunderstorms all over the globe. And you got all these airplanes up in the sky. Suddenly, their controls stop. Because after all, there's no power. No power means no control over the airplane whatsoever. Now, some of the planes may actually glide for a while. But the other ones, they've been trying to steer away from the thunderstorms. There's no autopilot to steer them away anymore, and now they have no control over the yoke of their airplane. So, what happens? Those planes fall into the thunderstorms, they get spun out of control, and they go, yee, boom, the end. Okay? So, that's one way they can crash. Here's the other. Let's say it is gliding along. Actually, it's not hitting the jet stream, so it's got a lot of control. It's just gliding along, and it starts to descend with no landing gear. Remember, you can't engage the landing gear because after all, there's no control. No landing gear, that plane hits the ground, boom, end of story. Now, with as many planes that are up in the air right now, you're telling me not one of them is ever going to hit a train? Guess again. Now, let's just say you got a car going over a railroad track. It stalls. There's no power anymore, so it stalls on the railroad track. Train hits car, train derails, boom, you got yourself a disaster. And as for your, oh, gee, we don't carry hazardous chemicals, really? Ammonia. Yes, trains in the Midwest carry ammonia, and I'm sure they're not the only trains that carry ammonia. I'm sure the Midwest is not the only place where you'll find trains with ammonia. Why do we have ammonia? Because of fertilizer. Remember that fertilizer you use to grow your crops with? Well, part of that's ammonia, and that's found on the trains. There you go, train derails, boom. And remember, if a plane hits that train, it's going to derail, boom. You're going to have a mess. So now all that ammonia is everywhere. Let's say it's not ammonia. Let's say it's chlorine. Yes, trains carry chlorine. Why? Because of your detergents, like Comet. Check your Comet cleanser. It has chlorine. They use chlorine in some of the water supplies. You know those famous water towers? Yeah, they dump chlorine down in there, those things, to make sure your water stays clean. Where do you think they get the chlorine from? They transport it by train. Train derails, chlorine goes everywhere, poisons the ground, and you got a mess. And remember, there's no way to clean that up. Now, if an airplane crashes on the ground in an area where it's really, really dry, that starts a forest fire. And then you have uncontrolled forest fires because you can't send any airplanes up to douse the flames because you have no more power anymore. But that's not the only things that trains carry. Yes, let's go back to those trains for a second. They also carry something called hydrogen fluoride. That's right, hydrogen fluoride. It's used in the processing of gasoline. And it's also used in etching glass. Okay, so if you have to etch your glass or you have to make gasoline, you've got to have hydrogen fluoride. And if that gets everywhere, you got yourself a real mess on your hands. And remember, there's no way to clean up any one of these three chemicals. So, there you have it. There you go. That's how the human population can starve. Now, I will go ahead and address the rest of your little statement. It says, I mean, how do you think the cavemen survived without McDonald's? Well, here's your answer. They weren't transporting ammonia in heavy quantities. They weren't transporting chlorine in heavy quantities. They weren't transporting hydrogen fluoride in heavy quantities. They didn't have to worry about chemical spills. They didn't have to worry about massive droughts. They didn't have to worry about airplanes dropping out of the sky and causing forest fires. They didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. That's how they survived. But you won't. You have an airplane land on a major housing district, and it goes up in flames because there's no way to control the flames anymore. And a lot of people are going to die. So there's my answer to you. In conclusion, airplanes can run into storms, lose control, and fall on the ground. They can actually land on the ground. They can actually land into a train and cause a toxic chemical mess. And how do you think they take those spent fuel rods out of nuclear power plants? Never thought about that, did you? Now, I admit that when it comes to airplanes, they are given instructions on how to steer away from nuclear power plants. No controls, no way to steer away from the nuclear power plant. Yeah, boom. Now you got a problem. And with as many planes as there are in the air right now, there's your problem. So, let's review. Airplanes can get into storms, they can crash. Even if they don't get into a storm, their landing gear doesn't engage, they can still crash. They crash in forested areas which are really, really dry. They create forest fires, which kills lots of people. Now, let's say they hit in a residential neighborhood. Creates a massive fire, just like the fires in Chicago. All of a sudden, you don't have housing for millions of people. And those millions of people could end up dead too, because remember, they may be still in their homes when the whole thing goes up. Schools being destroyed. Businesses being destroyed. And remember, they can't ship anything anywhere because, after all, no more trains. And those trains are hauling hazardous chemicals, ammonia, chlorine, hydrogen fluoride, and spent fuel rods from nuclear power plants. That's how you can have an ecological disaster of unbelievable proportion. You want to know why the cavemen survived? Because they had no nuclear power plants. They didn't clean with massive chlorine. They didn't clean with massive ammonia. They didn't clean, and they didn't produce gasoline with hydrogen fluoride. That's how they survived. We can't do that. So there is your answer. And yes, there will be airplanes that will actually hit trains and cause a toxic mess. One we will not be able to clean up if we go by what's on NBC Revolutions. That's why I say 15 years later, there wouldn't be a single person left alive on the planet Earth. Not one. Alright, hopefully that answered your question. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.